I was 24 when I started my first company. It was a typical how to make $1 million story. I had a big idea, no real capital, and a lot of ambition. Looking back, I realized that the ambition is what got me into trouble, not the idea. But it's been 5 years since then, and what I've learned along the way has shaped my understanding of entrepreneurship in ways that I could never have imagined back then. Here's my story. At the time, I had just finished college with a business degree. The economy was still recovering from the last crash, and I was struggling to find a full-time job. Everyone kept telling me, start your own business. You've got the skills for it. And at first, I thought they were just being supportive. But then, one night, as I lay awake in bed, I realized that this was the opportunity one had been waiting for. I spent the next few weeks thinking about business ideas, something I could build that would not only be profitable but also scalable. I wanted to create something that could grow without my constant input. After some brainstorming, I landed on the idea of an online subscription service for organic skincare products. The market was huge, and there was a growing trend towards health-conscious beauty products. I thought, this is it. This is my chance. I had no experience in skincare or beauty products, but I figured I could hire experts. I knew about marketing and branding, and those were my strengths. So, I borrowed a little money from my family, scraped together some savings, and got to work. I found a supplier who could provide organic skincare items at wholesale prices, and after months of research and a few sleepless nights, I launched my business online. I built the website myself. Thankfully, I had some web design experience and launched a small ad campaign on Facebook and Instagram to get the word out. The first few weeks were slow. I didn't have much of a following yet, and it felt like my efforts were barely paying off. But I kept pushing. I learned how to optimize my ads, tweak the website to improve conversion rates, and eventually, the sales started rolling in. However, that's when things began to get complicated. After a few months, I realized that even though sales were increasing, the profit margins were razor-thin. Sure, I had customers, but most of them were either canceling their subscriptions after the first month or never coming back for a second order. I quickly understood that customer retention was going to be the real challenge. So, I started experimenting. I worked with influencers to promote my products, partnered with organic beauty bloggers, and even created a loyalty program. But still, I wasn't seeing the growth I had hoped for. The reality hit hard. I was spending more money than I was making. My savings were dwindling, and I was stuck in a cycle of trying to acquire customers who didn't stick around. That's when I started talking to other entrepreneurs, trying to find answers. I met this one guy, Jeff, who ran a successful e-commerce business in a completely different industry. We hit it off immediately, and after a few conversations, he offered me some advice that completely changed my approach. You're not selling skincare, he said. You're selling a lifestyle. People want to feel good about the choices they make. They want to feel like they're part of something bigger than just a product. His words stuck with me, and I realized that he was right. I had been so focused on selling the products themselves that I hadn't built a brand around them. So, I pivoted. Instead of just offering a subscription service, I created a community. I started sharing more content about skincare, health, and wellness. I created video tutorials, hosted live Q&A sessions with experts, and built a blog around topics that my audience cared about. The first few months after this pivot were still slow, but I could see the potential. I started focusing more on customer feedback and using it to improve the products. Slowly but surely, my customer retention improved, and I started gaining more subscribers. But then, something unexpected happened. A big beauty retailer reached out to me about carrying my products in their stores. I couldn't believe it. I had built my brand online, but now I was being offered an opportunity to sell in brick-and-mortar locations. I was scared. Taking on such a big retail partnership would mean a lot of upfront costs, logistics, and risk. But at the same time, I knew it could change the trajectory of my business forever. I decided to take the plunge. The next few months were a whirlwind. I had to scale production, hire more people, and handle all the logistical challenges that came with entering retail. There were moments when I doubted myself, especially when things didn't go as planned. There were delays with shipments, issues with product quality control, and at one point, I was so stressed out that I barely slept for 2 weeks straight. But despite all the obstacles, my business started growing faster than I could have imagined. More and more stores began carrying my products, and my online sales continued to climb. I was finally able to hire a small team to help me with marketing, customer service, and operations. My dream of building a scalable business was coming true. Now, 5 years later, my company is worth millions, and I have a dedicated team working alongside me. We've expanded beyond skincare and now offer a full range of health and wellness products. We've built a loyal community of customers who believe in our mission, and the best part is that we've stayed true to our core values: quality, transparency, and empowerment. But here's the thing that I didn't realize when I started. The road to success is never linear. It's full of twists, turns, and setbacks. There were times when I thought about giving up, times when I doubted myself, and moments when I wished I could fast forward to the good parts. But looking back, every failure, every challenge, and every moment of doubt taught me something important. If I could go back in time and give myself one piece of advice, it would be this: don't chase after the idea of success. Instead, focus on building something you're proud of. The success will come as a result of your hard work, perseverance, and passion. And remember, every setback is just an opportunity to learn and grow. So, to anyone out there thinking about starting their own business, know this: it's going to be tough, and it's going to take longer than you think. But if you're willing to stick it out, to learn from your mistakes, and to keep moving forward, it can be one of the most rewarding experiences of your life. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. I used to be the kind of person who thought entrepreneurship was just a game for the lucky ones or those with a rich uncle. I had always been the safe kind of person: get a stable job, work 9 to 5, and wait for promotions to come. But then, life decided to shake things up, and my whole perspective changed. It started when I lost my job. It wasn't anything personal, just the company cutting costs, and I found myself without a paycheck in a city where rent was sky high. At first, I panicked. How would I pay my bills? How would I tell my family? I'd always prided myself on being responsible, and this felt like failure. But somewhere between sending out dozens of resumes that were met with silence and having long nights of staring at the ceiling, something shifted inside me. One night, I was walking through the city, trying to clear my head, when I passed by a small food truck. It was a taco truck, run by a woman in her early 40s, wearing a big smile and an apron. The line was long, and I stood there for a while, intrigued by how everyone was chatting and laughing while waiting for their turn to order. The food was good, but it wasn't just the tacos that fascinated me. It was the energy, the sense of community. She wasn't just selling food, she was selling an experience. I started thinking about how I had been living my life. All the years spent in cubicles, doing work that didn't make me feel alive, were now suddenly in sharp contrast to this woman who was out there creating something, building a connection with her customers. I started doing some research. How do you start a business? Where do you even begin? What were the steps to go from being unemployed to being a successful entrepreneur? It wasn't as easy as I thought, of course. The first thing I realized was that I had no money. No savings, no rich uncle, no backup plan. But I had time, and I had determination. And when it came to figuring out what to do, I asked myself a simple question: what do I love to do? It wasn't something I had thought about in years. But then I remembered, I had always loved cooking. Not the fancy stuff, but simple, hearty meals that bring people together. So, I figured, why not combine that with my love for street food? I decided to start small. Really small. I took my last bit of savings and bought a used food cart. It wasn't much, rusty, old, and barely functional, but it was mine. I spent the next few weeks reading up on food safety, permits, licenses, and anything I could find about running a food business. The hours were long, and there were days when I thought it would be easier to just throw in the towel. But then I thought about that taco truck and how much it inspired me. If she could do it, why couldn't I? The first week was brutal. I was parked in a small corner of a downtown area, trying to get people to notice me. My cart didn't have the flashy look of some of the more established trucks, and I didn't have the marketing budget to make myself stand out. But I made the food with love and attention to detail. I experimented with flavors, using ingredients I knew would make people take a second bite. Slowly but surely, people started noticing. The customers came in ones and twos at first, but then word of mouth spread. There was something special about my food. I wasn't just selling meals, I was making something people could connect with. By the end of the month, I had managed to scrape together enough money to fix up the cart a bit and hire a part-time assistant. The process was grueling, but I could see the progress. The business started gaining momentum. I created a social media account to share pictures of my food, and before I knew it, I was getting requests for catering jobs, private events, and even a few food festivals. The whole thing felt like a whirlwind. One day, I was unemployed, and the next, I was running a small but growing business. But as much as I loved cooking and the idea of being my own boss, the work didn't get any easier. If anything, it became more challenging. I had to learn everything, from managing finances to dealing with customer complaints. There were days when I was exhausted, when I felt like I was failing. There were even moments when I almost gave up. One particularly tough day, when a major catering job had gone wrong and I lost money on a bad investment in equipment, I sat in my truck, on the verge of tears, wondering if it was all worth it. But then I remembered something. I remembered the taco truck lady. She didn't give up. She kept going. If she could do it, I could too. So, I pushed through. I reached out to mentors, asked for advice, and learned from my mistakes. I started finding ways to streamline my processes and better manage my resources. It wasn't instant, but over time, I began to see the fruits of my labor. 2 years later, my food cart had turned into a small but successful food truck. I wasn't rich, but I was happy. I was proud of the business I had built from the ground up, and it had changed my life in ways I never thought possible. My customers were loyal, and I had a solid team behind me who believed in the vision. I started reinvesting profits into expanding the business. Catering became a major part of my income, and I eventually opened a second truck. It was a slow and steady climb, but I was living proof that persistence could pay off. What's funny is that I don't think of myself as a success story, at least not in the traditional sense. I didn't invent anything groundbreaking, and I didn't become an overnight millionaire. But I learned something far more valuable. Entrepreneurship isn't about luck. It's about resilience, adaptability, and never giving up, even when the odds are stacked against you. The best part? I finally understood that entrepreneurship isn't just about making money. It's about creating something meaningful, something that brings value to others. And for me, that was worth more than any paycheck I had ever received in my old corporate job. Looking back, I can honestly say that losing my job was one of the best things that ever happened to me. It pushed me out of my comfort zone, and it forced me to take a leap of faith. Now, I wake up every day excited to work, excited to grow, and excited to see where the next step of my journey will take me. Life might not always go as planned, but sometimes the detours lead to the best destinations. My story begins like so many others do, with a dream, a small budget, and a whole lot of determination. I was fresh out of college, with a degree that I had worked hard for, but no real direction. I'd majored in business, sure, but that didn't mean I had any clue what I was doing. I was 23, broke, and confused, staring at my laptop one day and wondering how so many people seemed to have figured it out before me. I wasn't sure where to start, but I had always loved technology and gadgets. I remember in high school, I'd take apart old computers and reassemble them, just because it was fun. So, I thought maybe I could build something around that passion. I didn't want to work for a big company. I didn't want to spend the next decade of my life working my way up the corporate ladder. I wanted something of my own. The first idea I had was to start a business around fixing computers, but honestly, it was a terrible idea. I didn't know enough about the technical side to really offer a competitive service, and the startup cost would have been prohibitive for someone with a student loan debt hanging over my head. So, I started looking at alternatives. I quickly realized that the world was going digital, and everyone, including businesses, would need websites. That was the opening I had been waiting for. The digital space was still growing, and businesses needed help navigating it. I didn't have a lot of money, so I couldn't hire anyone to build websites for me. Instead, I began teaching myself how to code. I spent countless nights watching YouTube tutorials, reading forums, and playing around with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. At first, it was slow, really slow. I'd write a few lines of code, hit refresh, and nothing would happen. Or worse, the page would break and I'd have no idea why. But little by little, I started to get the hang of it. I built a simple website for myself, something basic but functional, and used it as a portfolio. In the beginning, I didn't even have a real business name. I simply called it my web design. My pitch was simple: affordable websites for small businesses. I knew that businesses in my local area needed an online presence, but many of them didn't have the budget to work with agencies. I figured I could fill that gap. The next step was finding clients. I had no connections and no real reputation to speak of. My first few clients came from word of mouth and random cold emails to local businesses. I spent hours emailing small business owners, offering my services at a price point that would be attractive to them. I think I spent an entire month sending emails to over 200 local businesses, most of which didn't even respond. I was starting to get discouraged. Then, after weeks of rejection, I got a reply. It was from a local coffee shop owner who needed a website. The offer was small, just a few $100s, but it was enough for me to get started. I poured everything I had into that project, and when I handed it over to the coffee shop owner, she was thrilled. She loved the website and even referred me to some of her friends in the local restaurant industry. That was my breakthrough. I had officially landed my first paying client. From there, things started to pick up, but it wasn't an easy ride. I learned the hard way that running a business wasn't just about creating websites. It was about managing time, negotiating contracts, and dealing with clients who sometimes didn't know what they wanted or, worse, couldn't make up their minds. I started to develop systems, but the learning curve was steep. I had to figure out how to price my services, how to deal with clients who wanted endless revisions, and how to make sure I was making a profit while keeping clients happy. I also ran into the problem of scalability. For a while, I was the sole person doing everything, building websites, handling customer service, sending invoices, and marketing the business. It didn't take long for me to realize I couldn't grow this thing on my own. So, I took the plunge and hired my first employee, a part-time graphic designer to help with the design aspects of the sites I was building. That move was a game changer. With help, I was able to take on more clients, and I could focus more on growing the business. I began to systematize everything. I set up clear processes for every project, from the initial meeting with clients to the final handoff of the website. I also began to focus more on marketing. I spent a lot of time learning about SEO and social media marketing. Eventually, I built a strong online presence for my business, and leads started coming in consistently. As the business grew, so did my confidence. I hired more people, a full-time developer, a marketing specialist, and even a project manager. The more I invested in the business, the more it paid off. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were times when we faced challenges, like when a large client decided to back out halfway through a project, or when a competitor came along with a more aggressive pricing strategy. But I learned to embrace the setbacks as learning opportunities, and I refused to let them derail my progress. By the time I was 28, my business was bringing in 6 figures annually. I was no longer just building websites, I was running an agency. We had a team of 10 people, and we were working with clients all over the country. I'd gone from not knowing anything about coding to managing a growing tech company. But even as I achieved success, I never lost sight of what got me here, that scrappy, hungry drive to make something of myself. Today, the business has continued to grow, and we've expanded into full-service digital marketing. I've made mistakes along the way, but I've learned from them and adapted. Running a business is hard work, but it's also incredibly rewarding. There's nothing quite like the feeling of building something from the ground up and watching it thrive. Looking back, I can hardly believe how far I've come. The kid who spent all night watching coding tutorials is now the CEO of a successful business. I didn't have all the answers when I started, but I had the one thing that mattered most, the determination to keep pushing forward, even when things seemed impossible. And if there's one thing I can say for sure, it's that the journey is worth it. If you're thinking about starting your own business, my advice is simple: don't wait for the perfect moment. There will never be one. Start where you are, with what you have, and keep moving forward. You might surprise yourself. I was always the type of person who believed that success was built on a combination of timing, luck, and persistence. For most of my life, I thought I was destined to follow the same path as everyone else. Go to school, get a degree, work a 9 to 5, and slowly climb the corporate ladder. I had no idea that my life would take a very different turn. It all started when I was in my early 20s, just out of college, working at my first real job. I had an office in a nondescript building in the middle of the city, working for a small marketing agency. At first, I thought I had made it. I had my own desk, my own computer, and a steady paycheck. But after a few months, I started to feel like something was missing. I wasn't sure what it was, but it was like a gnawing feeling that I couldn't shake. One day, I found myself sitting in front of my computer, scrolling through social media when I saw a post from one of my friends. She was talking about her side hustle, how she had started selling handmade jewelry on Etsy. She was so excited because she had made her first sale. I looked at the post and thought to myself, why not me? I had always been a creative person, loved designing things, and I was getting tired of the monotony of my day job. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how I could start something of my own, something that wasn't just a side hustle, but a full-fledged business. I decided that I would take the plunge, but I wasn't sure where to begin. After a bit of research, I realized there was a huge market for custom t-shirts. People were always looking for unique designs, and I knew that I could create something people would love. But there was one major problem. I had no idea how to design or sell a t-shirt. The next few weeks were a blur of late-night Google searches, YouTube tutorials, and trial and error. I learned how to use graphic design software, figured out how to set up an online store, and even started researching manufacturers. I also spent hours perfecting my designs, trying to create something that would stand out from the sea of t-shirt businesses already out there. It was overwhelming, but I was determined. Every day after work, I would put in a couple of hours working on my business. It was exhausting, but I knew that it was my ticket to something bigger. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, I was ready to launch my online store. I didn't have a huge budget, so I relied on free social media platforms to promote my t-shirts. I posted on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, using hashtags to get noticed. At first, there was little to no response. I would get a few likes here and there, but nothing significant. I started to wonder if I had made a mistake, if I was just another person chasing a dream that would never come true. But then, something unexpected happened. One of my designs went viral. It was a simple graphic of a cat wearing sunglasses, but for some reason, people loved it. Within a few hours, my website traffic skyrocketed and orders started rolling in. It wasn't a huge amount of money, but it was a start. I was finally making some sales. I was ecstatic, but I knew that this was just the beginning. The next few months were a whirlwind. I was juggling my full-time job with my new business, and it was tough. There were days when I barely slept, and I was constantly worried that I wasn't doing enough to grow my brand. But I kept pushing forward, slowly refining my designs, and experimenting with new marketing strategies. I also started reaching out to influencers, offering them free t-shirts in exchange for shout-outs. Some said yes, some said no, but the ones who agreed helped me build a small, loyal customer base. By the time my second year of business rolled around, I was starting to see real success. My website had grown, I had a following on social media, and my designs were selling consistently. I had quit my day job, and I was now working on my business full-time. It felt like a dream come true, but the road to success was far from smooth. As my business grew, I encountered new challenges: manufacturing issues, shipping delays, and the constant pressure to stay ahead of trends. There were moments when I wondered if it was all worth it, but every time I felt like giving up, I reminded myself of where I had come from. I had started this business with nothing but a laptop, a few design ideas, and a dream. If I could build it up from the ground, I could overcome any obstacle. One of the biggest turning points in my journey came when I decided to take a risk and invest in paid advertising. Up until that point, I had been relying solely on organic reach, but I realized that in order to truly scale my business, I needed to reach more people. I put aside a small budget for ads, testing different strategies and targeting specific audiences. It was a gamble, and for a while, it didn't seem to be paying off. But then, I saw a surge in sales. The ads were working, and my business was growing faster than ever. As the years went by, my business continued to thrive. I expanded my product line to include accessories, home decor, and even custom-made apparel. I hired a small team to help with design, marketing, and customer service. We became a well-known brand, and I was invited to speak at events and collaborate with other entrepreneurs. It was surreal. The little side hustle I had started in my apartment was now a legitimate business with a dedicated following. Looking back, I realized that there were a lot of moments when I could have quit, when things felt overwhelming, or when I doubted my abilities. But I didn't give up. I kept pushing forward, believing in myself and my vision. And in the end, that persistence paid off. Today, my business is thriving. I'm not a billionaire or a household name, but I've created something that I'm incredibly proud of. I'm living life on my own terms, and I can't imagine doing anything else. The road to success wasn't easy, but it was worth every sleepless night, every setback, and every doubt. If I can do it, anyone can. It all started on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in 2015. I was sitting at a coffee shop in downtown Brooklyn, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee while scrolling through job postings on my phone. I had just left a job that I thought was my dream gig, working at a tech startup, and my world felt like it was crumbling. I was 25, living paycheck to paycheck, and trying to figure out what the hell I was doing with my life. The frustration was gnawing at me. I was stuck. I had a degree in computer science, but nothing felt like it was aligning with my passions. The only thing I knew for sure was that I didn't want to go back to a 9-to-5 grind. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more for me, but I had no clue what it was. I had always been interested in the idea of starting my own business, but it felt like one of those things that only people with money or connections could pull off. I didn't have either. Growing up, I was always the smart kid, the one who could excel in school and had dreams of becoming a big-time software engineer or entrepreneur. But now, I was struggling to make rent and figuring out how to pay off student loans that felt like they'd be hanging over me forever. That afternoon, I decided to stop waiting for a sign and make my own. I didn't have a concrete plan, but I had an idea. I wanted to build something that could help people, something that could simplify an aspect of life. I spent the next few weeks brainstorming, thinking of all the different ways technology could improve people's daily routines. Then one evening, while scrolling through social media, I came across an ad for a workout app. I clicked on it, and for some reason, something clicked in my mind. I was a huge fitness enthusiast, but I always struggled to keep track of my progress. It wasn't that I couldn't find apps that tracked workouts. They were everywhere. But none of them seemed to be designed for people like me, those who wanted a little more than just tracking reps and sets. I wanted a workout app that felt personal, something that could evolve with me as I improved, but also had that sense of community where I could connect with other people who were as passionate about fitness as I was. It hit me in that moment. Why not create that app myself? I was aware of how naive that might sound. I had no experience in building apps beyond a few personal projects in college. I didn't know the first thing about getting something off the ground. But that didn't matter. I was ready to jump into the unknown. I spent the next few weeks diving deep into research. I learned everything I could about app development, marketing, and the fitness industry. I reached out to friends who were working in tech to get advice. Slowly but surely, I started piecing everything together. But I needed a name for the app, something that would resonate with people. After a few weeks of brainstorming, I came up with FitTrack. It was simple, to the point, and perfectly captured the essence of what I wanted the app to be. Then came the tough part, actually building it. I started by working on the app's wireframe, sketching out what the user experience would look like. I didn't have the budget to hire developers, so I used my basic coding knowledge to start creating a prototype. My evenings became consumed with writing code, learning new programming languages, and slowly assembling something that looked like an app. I also started creating social media pages for FitTrack to begin building a community. I knew that a huge part of launching a successful product was having a group of users who were excited and engaged. So, I posted about my progress, shared fitness tips, and interacted with other fitness enthusiasts. At first, it was slow going. I had only a handful of followers, but they were supportive. It gave me the fuel to keep going. After months of late nights and countless iterations, I finally had a basic version of the app ready. It wasn't perfect, but it was functional. I decided to take the plunge and launch it. I pushed it live on the App Store and Google Play, unsure of what would happen next. I knew I was going to face major challenges, but I also knew I had to start somewhere. Within the first week, the app had a few hundred downloads. That wasn't much, but it was a start. The real breakthrough came a month later. A fitness influencer with a following of over 100,000 people posted a review of the app on Instagram. She mentioned how FitTrack helped her track her progress more efficiently and how the community aspect kept her motivated. That post went viral. In a matter of days, FitTrack shot up the App Store rankings. I was getting hundreds of emails every day from people thanking me for creating something that actually worked for them. I didn't know it at the time, but that one influencer was the spark that set everything in motion. Over the next year, FitTrack exploded. I didn't have a team at first, so I did everything myself. I responded to every email, I worked on improvements, and I handled customer service. The community grew, and people were genuinely excited about the app. I had no marketing budget, so word of mouth was the most powerful tool I had. Eventually, I realized I couldn't keep doing everything on my own. I had to hire a team. I brought on developers, marketers, and designers who shared my vision. The growth became exponential, and soon enough, We were getting millions of downloads every month. We introduced premium features, partnerships with gyms, and even added personalized workout plans. The app evolved far beyond what I had originally envisioned. Now, here I am in 2025, sitting in an office with a team of 50 people and a product that has completely changed the way people think about fitness. We've helped millions of users reach their fitness goals, and FitTrack has become one of the top fitness apps worldwide. And yet, the feeling that drives me is the same one I had when I started. I'm not here because of luck or timing, but because I took the leap and did something that scared me. I've learned so many lessons along the way. There were times when I was broke, when I was unsure if the app would even take off, and when I felt like quitting. But every failure, every obstacle, every setback has made me stronger. Entrepreneurship isn't about having all the answers up front. It's about the willingness to keep moving forward, even when you don't know where the road leads. If I could give any advice to someone who's just starting out, it would be this: don't wait for the perfect moment, because it will never come. Start with what you have, no matter how small or imperfect it may seem. The road will be tough, but if you keep pushing forward, you'll look back one day and realize how far you've come. I didn't have a plan when I started FitTrack, but I had a vision, and that vision led me here. I was 22 when I decided to start my own business. Looking back, I can hardly believe it. I had no real experience in entrepreneurship, no connections, no capital, and definitely no idea what I was doing. But what I did have was a dream that somehow seemed more attainable than the reality I found myself in at the time. It all started with a simple idea that came to me one afternoon while I was stuck in a dead-end job. I was working at a small tech support call center. It was one of those jobs where you show up every day, put on your headset, and talk to frustrated customers about problems that you could barely understand. The pay was minimum wage, and the atmosphere was toxic. People came and went, but nobody stayed. It felt like I was trapped in a loop of mediocrity. One day, I was troubleshooting an issue for a customer who was clearly struggling with a very basic software application. As I walked them through the solution, I realized that the software was unnecessarily complicated. It wasn't just this person who had issues. I started to notice that many people, even those who were tech-savvy, struggled with these types of programs. That's when it hit me. There had to be a better way to create user-friendly software. Something that wouldn't require a manual to operate. Something that was intuitive. I had no coding experience at the time, but I decided I would create something that was easy to use. I would make an app. Something simple but powerful enough to solve a real problem. But what was the problem? I spent the next few weeks in a haze of brainstorming and researching. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how overwhelmed the average person felt when using tech. Not just with software, but with devices and gadgets in general. People were getting smarter, but the tools were getting more complicated. And so, the seed for my business was planted, an app that would simplify everyday tech for regular people. I had no money to start this venture, but I did have time. I spent countless hours watching tutorials online and reading everything I could about app development. I didn't know the first thing about coding, but I was determined to learn. I remember sitting at my small desk at my apartment, my eyes bloodshot from staring at the screen for hours. But I pushed through. Every small victory, a bug fixed, a line of code that worked, kept me going. At first, it felt like a joke. I was just some guy in a crappy apartment with no real business experience trying to make an app. But I didn't care. I kept telling myself that if I didn't try, I'd never know. And so I worked on my idea every free minute I had. I was obsessed. After a couple of months, I had a basic prototype. It wasn't polished, but it worked. I reached out to a few friends to test it out. They didn't understand what it was supposed to do at first, but once they started using it, the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. It wasn't the most sophisticated app, but it was simple, intuitive, and did what it was supposed to do. That's when I knew I had something. But I didn't have money for marketing or development costs, so I turned to crowdfunding. I set up a campaign on Kickstarter, offering early access to the app in exchange for backing. I had no following, no influence, and no reputation. It felt like a shot in the dark, but it was my only shot. I poured all my energy into that campaign. I didn't sleep for days, promoting it on social media, emailing influencers, and reaching out to anyone who might give me a chance. At first, nothing happened. I felt like I was shouting into the void. But then, slowly, people started to notice. Small tech blogs picked it up. A few early adopters backed the project. Word started to spread. In the end, I raised enough money to develop the app further. But it wasn't just the money that I gained from the campaign. I gained confidence. People believed in the idea, and that belief gave me the strength to keep going. With the funding, I hired a freelance developer to help me finish the app. I worked alongside him, learning everything I could about development. We spent months refining the product. The app slowly started to become what I envisioned, a tool that made tech easier for everyday people. Finally, after almost a year of sleepless nights and constant iteration, the app was ready for launch. I didn't have a huge marketing budget, but I knew that the best way to get people interested was through word of mouth. I reached out to anyone who had shown interest during the Kickstarter campaign and asked them to spread the word. I also reached out to influencers in the tech space, offering them a free trial of the app in exchange for a review. The launch was nerve-wracking. I didn't know if people would like it, or if they'd even care. But to my surprise, the response was incredible. People loved the simplicity and the ease of use. I started receiving emails from people telling me how much the app had helped them. Sales started coming in, and the business slowly began to grow. At first, it was slow, just a few $100s here and there. But then, the app started to gain traction. As more people downloaded it, the more buzz it created. I started getting calls from potential investors, and I realized that this could actually turn into something big. But I wasn't ready to sell. I wanted to build this on my own. I hired a small team, including a marketer and a customer support specialist. With their help, we started scaling the app. We added new features, improved user experience, and made sure that we were always listening to feedback. Years went by, and the app grew into a full-fledged business. It wasn't just a small side project anymore. It was my life. I had gone from being an overworked, underpaid call center employee to running a tech company. We raised additional funding and expanded internationally. The journey was difficult, and there were plenty of times when I thought about giving up. But looking back, I'm glad I didn't. Today, our app has millions of users. We've been featured in major tech publications, and we've even been invited to speak at conferences. I still pinch myself sometimes when I think about how far I've come. It all started with a simple idea, but it took years of hard work, perseverance, and learning. I guess the moral of the story is that you don't need to have it all figured out to start. You don't need to have all the answers or all the resources. You just need to take that first step and be willing to learn and adapt along the way. If I can do it, anyone can. I always knew I wanted to be my own boss. From a young age, I saw my parents struggle to make ends meet. My father worked long hours as a construction worker, while my mother juggled multiple jobs, always worried about bills piling up. They taught me the value of hard work, but also the weight of financial insecurity. That fear of living paycheck to paycheck stayed with me throughout my life. I knew I wanted something more for myself and my future family, so I set my sights on entrepreneurship. The problem was, I had no idea where to start. I was in my late 20s, working a 9-to-5 job at a call center. It paid the bills, but I hated every minute of it. I spent my breaks daydreaming about what I could be doing if I wasn't stuck in that cubicle. My dream? To start my own business. But what kind of business? I wasn't sure. I just knew I had to find something, anything, that would allow me to break free. One evening, while scrolling through social media, I came across a post from a friend who had recently started selling custom t-shirts online. She posted about how she made a few $1,000s in just a couple of weeks. I couldn't believe it. I knew people were doing things like that, but to see someone I knew succeed, that was a game changer. It lit a spark inside me. I spent the next few days researching online about how to get started in e-commerce. I read countless blog posts, watched YouTube videos, and joined online forums to learn everything I could. After a few weeks of planning, I decided to take the plunge. I used every penny I had saved up to buy my first batch of inventory, a small collection of trendy graphic t-shirts. I didn't have a fancy website at first, so I started small by listing my products on eBay and Etsy. I made a simple Instagram account and started posting pictures of the shirts, hoping people would take notice. The first few weeks were slow. In fact, it felt like no one cared. My sales were practically non-existent. But I refused to give up. I remembered how my parents kept going despite all their struggles, and I knew that quitting was not an option. Then one day, it happened. I woke up to a notification. I had made a sale. It wasn't much, just one t-shirt, but it was a sign. Someone out there liked my product. I made sure to send that shirt out with the best customer service I could offer, hoping that word of mouth would help me grow. Over the next few months, I kept improving my designs, experimenting with different styles, and adjusting my marketing strategy. Slowly but surely, things started to pick up. I expanded to other platforms, including Shopify, and eventually started running Facebook ads. The growth wasn't explosive, but it was steady. I didn't get rich overnight, but I was making enough to quit my call center job. Quitting that job was one of the hardest decisions I ever made. I had bills to pay, and the fear of failure loomed over me. But deep down, I knew it was the right move. I didn't want to spend another year of my life stuck in a cubicle, watching my dreams slip further away. I decided to go all in, no looking back. Fast forward a year, and my business was thriving. My sales had tripled, and I was able to hire a few part-time employees to help with packing and shipping. I finally had the freedom I had always dreamed of. No more alarm clocks, no more clocking in and out. I could set my own hours, take vacations when I wanted, and most importantly, I was in control of my own future. But then came the real challenge, scaling. It was one thing to run a small operation from my bedroom, but now I had a growing team, a larger inventory, and more orders than I could handle on my own. I had to find a way to streamline my processes and create a more efficient workflow. I spent countless hours researching software, automating parts of the business, and testing out new marketing tactics. The pressure was mounting, but I knew this was a critical point in my journey. I couldn't afford to mess up. That's when I hit a major roadblock. My website crashed during a major sale event. My server couldn't handle the traffic, and for hours, customers were unable to place orders. I was panicking. I didn't know if I could recover from this. But instead of giving up, I took action. I called my hosting provider, got everything sorted, and made sure my website was optimized for high traffic. I also sent out an apology email to everyone who had been affected, offering them a discount on their next purchase. I was transparent, honest, and willing to own my mistakes. To my surprise, the response was overwhelmingly positive. People appreciated that I took the time to address the issue and offer a solution. The experience taught me an invaluable lesson. No matter how much you plan or how well you execute, things will go wrong. The key is to stay calm, adapt quickly, and always prioritize your customers. With time, my business continued to grow. I was able to expand my product line, adding everything from custom hoodies to accessories. I partnered with influencers, ran seasonal promotions, and built a strong community around my brand. By year 3, I was able to move my business out of my home and into a warehouse. It felt surreal to have a physical location for my business after starting in a tiny apartment with a desk and a printer. But the success didn't come without sacrifices. There were sleepless nights, long hours, and moments when I questioned whether it was all worth it. I missed out on family events, lost friendships, and at times felt like I was drowning in work. But the payoff came when I was able to step back and look at what I had built. My company was now generating 6 figures in revenue every year, and I had created jobs for others. Most importantly, I had created a life for myself that was on my own terms. Looking back, I realized that entrepreneurship is not a smooth ride. It's a roller coaster with highs and lows. But if you're willing to put in the work, learn from your mistakes, and keep pushing forward, it can be one of the most rewarding things you'll ever do. The journey isn't always easy, but the freedom and fulfillment that come with it make it all worthwhile. If I had listened to the voice in my head telling me to stay safe, to keep that 9 to 5 job, I'd still be stuck in that same miserable office. Instead, I took a risk. I followed my instincts. And in the end, it paid off. My business is more than just a way to make money now. It's a testament to the power of persistence and believing in yourself. Today, I'm living the life I always dreamed of. I'm not just an entrepreneur. I'm a creator, a leader, and an example of what's possible when you never give up. And I'm just getting started. I had always dreamed of becoming an entrepreneur, but like many people, I didn't have a clear path laid out before me. I was raised in a small town where everyone worked 9 to 5 jobs and didn't think much about taking risks. My parents were hardworking people, but the idea of chasing dreams outside of stability was foreign to them. I grew up understanding that a steady paycheck was the safest way to live, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was meant for something more. I just didn't know what. After high school, I went to college with the intention of becoming a doctor. It seemed like the perfect career, respected, well-paying, and stable. I studied biology, spent countless hours in labs, and interned at local clinics. But the more I delved into the medical field, the more I realized that it wasn't for me. I wasn't passionate about it, and the pressure of keeping up with grades in a field that didn't excite me was wearing me down. I couldn't see myself waking up every day to the same routine for the next 40 years. At the same time, I started picking up side hustles to make extra money. I began selling old electronics on eBay and later got into reselling designer clothes and sneakers. It was all very small scale at first, just a way to make some extra cash in my free time. But what I noticed was that I enjoyed this hustle far more than my biology studies. It was exciting. It was unpredictable. It gave me a taste of entrepreneurship, and I liked it. Around the time I was graduating, I had the harsh realization that I didn't want to go into medicine at all. I'd invested years into it, but the truth was I had been pursuing something because it was expected of me, not because I had any passion for it. I had a deep conversation with my parents, and while they were disappointed, they understood. But they also asked the tough question, what now? I didn't have an answer, but I knew it was time to take a leap. I had no real savings at that point. My side hustles were growing, but not enough to live off of. I had a few $1,000s in my bank account, which seemed like a lot at the time, but in reality, it was barely enough to cover the initial expenses of a business. Still, I was determined. I decided to give entrepreneurship a real shot. My first big idea came from my side hustle of reselling sneakers. I saw the potential in the sneaker market. Limited edition shoes were being released all the time, and I noticed a pattern of demand versus supply. I decided to start a small sneaker boutique that would focus on rare, hard-to-find kicks. The market was flooded with sellers, but there was room for someone who could provide value with exceptional customer service and a unique selection. I created an online store, reached out to sneaker manufacturers, and connected with suppliers. The first few months were rough. I had to navigate the ins and outs of inventory, shipping logistics, and building an online presence. I poured hours into research, learning about branding, social media marketing, and customer engagement. I still had no formal training in business, so I relied on online courses, YouTube videos, and anything I could find to teach myself how to run a company. But despite the steep learning curve, things started picking up. Slowly but surely, my brand gained recognition. One of the keys to my success in those early days was staying connected with my customers. I responded to every inquiry personally, ensured orders were shipped quickly, and made sure to follow up with every customer. This personal touch created loyalty, and people began recommending my store to others. As sales grew, I reinvested all the profits back into the business, buying more inventory, improving my website, and even hiring a part-time employee to help with customer service. But despite the momentum, things were not always smooth sailing. I remember one particular time when I made a huge mistake that nearly cost me everything. I had invested heavily in a batch of rare sneakers, thinking they would sell quickly. But the market shifted unexpectedly, and the demand for those particular shoes dropped like a rock. I was stuck with hundreds of pairs that weren't selling, and my cash flow was dangerously low. I had to make some hard decisions: sell at a loss, hold on, and hope demand would rise again, or find a way to pivot. It was at that moment that I realized how critical it was to stay agile and adaptable in business. I decided to pivot. I sold off a portion of the sneakers at a loss to free up cash, but I also started reaching out to new groups of people who had a different set of interests. I began expanding my product line to include apparel, accessories, and even custom sneakers. I leveraged my existing customer base to push these new products. The change wasn't immediate, but it paid off. From that point forward, I became much more strategic about what I stocked in my store. I started listening to customer feedback, learning about trends, and really studying the market. I also expanded my brand into social media marketing in a bigger way, collaborating with influencers and sneaker enthusiasts. I began hosting pop-up events where people could buy directly from me, creating a community around my brand. The hustle was exhausting, but it was paying off. The first year was a blur, but by the end of it, my business had grown into something sustainable. I was finally able to quit my day job and focus solely on my sneaker business. Things continued to grow, and I took on more risk. I began opening physical stores in high-demand areas, where foot traffic was high, and there was a strong sneaker culture. With the increased visibility, my brand became a staple in the sneaker world. I also partnered with well-known athletes and influencers who wore my products, giving my brand even more exposure. Every step felt like an uphill battle, but I felt a sense of pride every time I overcame an obstacle. I was building something of my own, and it was working. Looking back now, I realized that my success wasn't due to any grand stroke of luck, but rather the relentless hustle and willingness to adapt. Entrepreneurship is tough, and it's not about avoiding mistakes. It's about learning from them and pushing forward. I could have easily given up when I made that bad investment or when things weren't moving fast enough. But every challenge I faced taught me something valuable. That knowledge and resilience were what allowed me to keep growing my business. Today, my sneaker boutique is more than just a store. It's a brand that has transcended the world of shoes and into a lifestyle. I've opened multiple locations, expanded into new cities, and even started creating my own line of exclusive sneakers. And I couldn't be prouder of how far I've come. But as any entrepreneur will tell you, the journey is far from over. Every day brings new challenges, and every new challenge brings an opportunity to learn and grow. The key is to never stop hustling, to always stay true to the customer, and to keep evolving. And to anyone out there thinking of starting their own business, my advice is simple: don't wait for the perfect moment. You'll never feel fully ready, but if you have the passion and the grit, the rest will follow. There's no better time than now to start. Hey, friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. My journey into entrepreneurship started in a way that most people probably wouldn't expect. I didn't come from a rich family. I didn't have any grand ideas that struck me in the middle of the night, and I certainly didn't have any mentors guiding me along the way. I was just a regular guy who had no clue what I was doing, but was stubborn enough to keep going. It all began when I was 26. I had just been laid off from my job as a marketing assistant for a small startup. It wasn't a glamorous position by any means, but it paid the bills. I had spent 3 years in that job, and while I wasn't in love with it, I wasn't really doing anything to change my situation either. But now, here I was, unemployed with no safety net and no clear direction. For the first few weeks, I sulked. I watched Netflix, played video games, and generally did everything I could to avoid thinking about the future. But then, one morning, I woke up and realized I had to do something. I didn't have any savings, I didn't have a huge network, and frankly, I didn't know how I was going to make it. But I had one thing: time. And I knew I had to use it wisely. I'd always had a passion for fitness, even though it wasn't anything I pursued professionally. I wasn't a personal trainer, I didn't have a degree in exercise science, but I knew how to work out, eat healthy, and take care of my body. That's when the idea hit me: why not try to turn my passion into a business? But it couldn't just be any fitness business. I needed something unique, something that stood out from the crowded market. So I started researching. I spent hours every day reading articles, watching YouTube videos, and learning as much as I could about fitness businesses, personal training, and online coaching. I was amazed by how much information was out there. The more I learned, the more I realized that this could actually work. I had an idea for a fitness program that was tailored to busy professionals who didn't have time to go to the gym every day. The program would be built around short, high-intensity workouts that could be done in under 30 minutes at home or in the office. I was excited, but also terrified. I had no clients, no credibility, and no idea how to market myself. The only thing I had was the belief that people wanted what I was offering. I knew I could help people, and that was enough for me to take the leap. I started building a website. I had no experience in web development, so I used a free platform that allowed me to create a simple landing page. The site was basic, but it had everything I needed: a description of my program, some testimonials from friends who had tried it out, and a call to action to sign up. I was ready to launch. The first few days were, honestly, a disaster. No one signed up. I spent hours posting on Facebook and Instagram, hoping to get some attention, but the engagement was low. I felt defeated, but I wasn't ready to give up yet. I decided to try something different. I reached out to local businesses and offered to give free fitness classes during lunch breaks. I thought this would help me build some exposure and potentially get some clients. To my surprise, some businesses actually said yes. I started hosting classes for small groups, and while it wasn't a huge success, it helped me build confidence and get some real-world experience. I began to see that people were willing to pay for what I was offering. It wasn't easy. There were weeks where I made no money. There were days when I doubted myself and wondered if I was completely wasting my time. But slowly, things began to pick up. One client led to another, and word of mouth started to spread. I learned how to market my business online, how to write compelling content, and how to engage with my audience. It was a slow and steady climb, but each step forward felt like a small victory. After about 6 months of struggling, I finally reached a point where I could afford to invest in better tools. I upgraded my website, bought a better camera to film workouts, and started creating online courses. That's when everything changed. I began to see a steady stream of signups for my online program. People were telling their friends, sharing my content, and even leaving positive reviews. The momentum was finally building. By the end of my first year, I had turned a profit. I wasn't rolling in cash, but I was making enough to sustain myself. I was able to quit the part-time jobs I had picked up along the way and focus exclusively on my business. I was working harder than I ever had before, but it didn't feel like work anymore. I was doing something I loved. As my business grew, so did my vision. I began to expand my offerings, adding group coaching, one-on-one sessions, and even creating a membership site for exclusive content. My client base continued to grow, and I started collaborating with other fitness professionals to bring in new perspectives and ideas. The next few years were a blur of growth, challenges, and hard work. I had my ups and downs, of course. There were times when I thought I had everything figured out, only to realize that the business landscape had changed, and I needed to adapt. There were moments when I questioned whether I was cut out for this. But through it all, I stayed focused on the goal, to help people live healthier lives while building a business that allowed me to live mine on my terms. Fast forward to today, and my fitness business is thriving. I've been able to hire a small team to help with content creation, marketing, and customer support. I no longer work 18-hour days, but I still feel as passionate about my business as I did when I started. The difference is, I now have systems in place that allow me to work smarter, not harder. Looking back, I realized that what made the difference wasn't some brilliant business strategy or groundbreaking idea. It was the willingness to keep going when everything seemed stacked against me. It was the ability to learn from mistakes, pivot when necessary, and, most importantly, believe in myself even when no one else did. If there's one thing I can say to anyone thinking about starting their own business, it's this: persistence is key. The road won't be easy, and there will be times when you feel like quitting. But if you keep pushing forward, step by step, you'll get there. It's been a long journey, but I'm proud of how far I've come. And the best part? I'm just getting started. A few years ago, I found myself working a job that I hated. It wasn't a terrible job, but it was one of those positions where you sit at a desk, do your thing, and try not to think too hard about your future. I was a corporate drone, and it didn't matter how many coffee breaks I took or how many hours I spent trying to fake enthusiasm. Deep down, I knew I was wasting my time. I had always wanted to start my own business. Ever since I was a kid, I've been obsessed with entrepreneurship. My grandfather was a small business owner, and I admired the way he ran his company. It wasn't glamorous, but it was fulfilling. He didn't make millions, but he worked hard, created jobs for others, and built something from the ground up. That was the life I wanted. But how was I going to get from my boring desk job to something meaningful? One day, as I was sitting at my desk, scrolling through social media to avoid doing any real work, I came across an ad for a course about starting an online business. Normally, I would have scrolled right past it, but something about the ad caught my attention. It was a real person, talking about how they went from being broke and stuck in a dead-end job to running a six-figure business from home. The pitch was slick, but it wasn't overly flashy or unrealistic. The person sounded like me, just a normal, tired soul looking for a way out. I clicked on the link. The course seemed expensive for someone like me, but I figured if I was ever going to leave my dead-end job, I needed to take some risks. I put the course on my credit card, even though it was a stretch, and made the decision to follow through. I was determined not to be one of those people who started something and gave up 2 weeks later. I knew that if I was going to do this, I had to commit fully. The first few weeks were a blur. The course was overwhelming, and I felt like a deer caught in headlights. There were so many moving pieces. I had to learn about websites, social media marketing, and sales funnels, terms that were completely foreign to me. But I pushed through. The more I learned, the more excited I became. I realized that I had been limiting myself all along, thinking that success was reserved for people who had a business degree or knew the right people. The course taught me that anyone could do it if they were willing to put in the work. I decided that I was going to start an e-commerce business. I didn't have a specific product in mind, but I knew that I wanted to sell something that people would actually want to buy. I spent hours researching, testing different products, and trying to figure out what would resonate with my target audience. I'll be honest, I failed a lot at first. I made mistakes with my marketing, my website, and my product selection, but I learned from every single failure. Every failure was a lesson, and I began to apply those lessons in real time. Eventually, after about 4 months of consistent work, I launched my first product, a set of eco-friendly water bottles. They weren't revolutionary, but they were well-designed, affordable, and they aligned with a growing trend of sustainability. I used social media to promote them, reaching out to influencers who might be interested in the product. I ran Facebook ads. I wrote blog posts. Slowly but surely, sales started trickling in. I won't lie, there were moments when I thought about quitting. The sales weren't pouring in as fast as I had imagined, and I was still working my day job. There were nights when I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open, but I kept going. I was driven by the thought of leaving my corporate job behind, of finally building something that was mine. By month 6, I was seeing a consistent flow of sales. It wasn't enough to quit my job yet, but it was enough to make me believe that I was onto something. I kept reinvesting the money I made into the business, upgrading my website, improving my marketing, and expanding my product range. Slowly, I started seeing results. By the end of my first year, I had made over $100,000 in revenue. It wasn't just a fluke. I had built a real business, and it was growing. The next year was a game changer. I quit my day job and went full-time with my business. I focused on scaling, hiring a small team to help with customer service, marketing, and logistics. The freedom was incredible. I no longer had to answer to anyone. I could work from home, set my own hours, and focus entirely on building my business. There were still challenges. Running a business isn't easy, even when you're doing something you love. But the highs were higher, and the lows were easier to manage when I knew I was building something meaningful. I started making enough money to reinvest in the business, launch new products, and even travel while still managing everything remotely. The stress was still there, but it felt like the good kind of stress, the kind that comes with growth and progress. Fast forward to today, and my business is doing better than I ever could have imagined. We've expanded into new product categories, and we've built a loyal customer base. We've been featured in a few major publications, and I'm constantly amazed at how far we've come from that small e-commerce store I started with a simple water bottle. It's been a roller coaster of ups and downs, but I wouldn't change a thing. Now, I want to be clear. My story isn't some fairy tale of instant success. There were no overnight riches. I didn't have a trust fund or a special mentor. It took hard work, a willingness to fail, and a mindset shift. I had to stop thinking of myself as someone who just had a job and start thinking of myself as someone who was building a future. It wasn't always easy, but it was worth it. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. The person who sat at a desk every day, staring at a computer screen and dreaming of something more, is now the owner of a successful business that supports me and a small team of employees. It still blows my mind, and there are times when I have to pinch myself to make sure it's real. If you're reading this and thinking about starting your own business, know that it's possible. But it won't be easy. There will be days when you want to give up. There will be moments when you question yourself and wonder if it's all worth it. But if you keep pushing forward, keep learning, and stay focused on your vision, you can make it happen. It won't be a straight line, but every step will bring you closer to your dream. I'm living proof of that. To anyone out there who feels stuck in a job they don't love, take that first step. It might be terrifying, but it's the first step towards something incredible. Believe me, the journey is worth it. I started my entrepreneurial journey with nothing but a beat-up laptop, a handful of ideas, and the belief that I could turn my dreams into a reality. Back in 2017, I was living in a tiny one-bedroom apartment, working a dead-end job as a customer service representative. My paycheck barely covered rent, let alone bills or food. I had always wanted to start a business, but like most people, I had no idea where to begin. My entire world was filled with self-doubt and fear of failure. The thought of risking everything to build something from scratch felt overwhelming. But one night, after a long shift, I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I was scrolling through social media when I came across a post from someone who had just launched a successful e-commerce store. They were making money while sleeping. They were traveling the world. They seemed to have it all. I remember thinking to myself, if they can do it, why can't I? That night, I made a promise to myself. I was going to figure out how to start my own business, no matter what it took. I began by learning everything I could about online business. I watched hours of YouTube tutorials, read blog posts, and followed successful entrepreneurs on social media. I discovered the world of dropshipping, a business model that didn't require me to hold inventory. I thought, this is it. It seemed like the perfect solution. No overhead costs, no warehouse to manage, just a website and suppliers who would ship products directly to my customers. It sounded too good to be true. But, like any beginner, I ran into countless roadblocks. The first was choosing a niche. I spent weeks researching potential products to sell. I considered everything from beauty products to gadgets, but nothing really clicked. One day, I stumbled across a popular fitness influencer on Instagram who was promoting a new type of resistance band. It was unique, and there was a growing trend around home workouts. I thought, okay, this could be something people want. I spent the next few weeks building a website. I had no prior experience with web design, so I used Shopify and chose a pre-made template. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. Then, I set up social media accounts and started posting content about fitness, health, and wellness, even though I wasn't a fitness expert myself. I hired a freelance graphic designer to make my brand logo, and soon, I had everything ready to launch. When the day finally came, I was nervous, but excited. I set up a modest budget for Facebook ads, targeting people who were interested in fitness. I launched my campaign and waited, and waited, and waited. Days passed, and nothing happened. No sales, no traffic, just a few likes and comments on my posts. I felt like a failure. I thought I had made a huge mistake. I questioned my decision to leave my stable job and put so much time, energy, and money into this idea. But then, I remembered something from one of the podcasts I had listened to, Persistence Beats Resistance. I decided to push forward. I started tweaking my ads, experimenting with different audiences, and refining my website. I also began reaching out to fitness influencers to see if they would promote my products. Slowly, but surely, things started to improve. I made my first sale after 2 weeks, and although it wasn't much, it felt like a huge win. That first customer left a review saying the resistance band had helped them with their workout, and it gave me the boost I needed to keep going. As the months passed, I continued to learn from my mistakes. I got better at running Facebook ads, and my sales slowly increased. But I still wasn't making enough to quit my job. I kept telling myself that if I could just scale it up a little more, I'd be able to go full-time with my business. Then, something unexpected happened. One of the influencers I had reached out to months earlier responded to me. She had used the resistance bands in one of her workout videos, and it went viral. My sales skyrocketed overnight. I was overwhelmed. In a matter of weeks, I went from making $100 a week to making $10,000 a month. I could finally quit my day job and focus on my business full-time. But the journey didn't stop there. The next challenge was managing growth. My small operation was suddenly swamped with orders. I had to hire my first employee to help with customer service, and I worked long hours to keep up with the demand. I also started experimenting with new products and expanding my product line. At one point, I decided to try selling yoga mats, as they seemed to be a good fit with my resistance bands. It turned out to be a great decision, and soon, I had a steady stream of sales coming in from multiple product categories. But despite the success, I was struggling with burnout. I was working 12-hour days, 7 days a week, just to keep up with orders and customer inquiries. I realized that if I wanted to take my business to the next level, I needed to hire a team. So, I began building a small but reliable group of employees who handled everything from marketing to logistics. With the right team in place, I was able to focus more on the bigger picture, growing my brand and expanding internationally. By 2020, my business had grown exponentially. I had launched a new website, streamlined my operations, and built partnerships with major retailers. My company was now a well-known brand in the fitness industry, with thousands of loyal customers around the world. I had gone from being a broke customer service rep to being the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. I won't lie, there were plenty of times I wanted to give up. The early days were filled with self-doubt, financial struggles, and sleepless nights. But the key was persistence. I kept showing up, learning, and adjusting my strategies. Even when things weren't going well, I kept moving forward. I've come to realize that success doesn't happen overnight. It's the result of taking small, consistent steps every day, even when it feels like you're not getting anywhere. Now, looking back at everything I've accomplished, I realize that the hardest part of being an entrepreneur isn't the technical stuff, it's the mindset. The ability to push through the tough times, to keep learning and growing, and to embrace failure as part of the process. If you're thinking about starting your own business, just know this. It's not easy, but it's worth it. If I can do it, anyone can. I'm proof that with enough grit, determination, and a willingness to learn from your mistakes, you can turn your dreams into reality. My story begins in a small town in Nebraska. Growing up in a family of modest means, my parents always told me that a steady job, benefits, and job security were the keys to success. They emphasized the importance of hard work, showing up every day, and keeping your head down. I never questioned it at the time. My dad worked as a mechanic, and my mom was a teacher. They both loved their jobs, but neither of them made a lot of money. We were always comfortable, but never extravagant. I was the kind of kid who liked to tinker with things. I had a knack for fixing broken toys, figuring out how stuff worked, and trying to improve things. My parents encouraged me to follow the traditional path, get good grades, go to college, and then find a stable job. But deep down, I always knew that the life they described didn't feel right for me. At 18, I graduated from high school and went off to college. I enrolled in a business management program, mostly because I didn't know what else to do. I wasn't sure if I was passionate about business, but I thought it would give me a stable foundation. College wasn't terrible, but it wasn't exactly inspiring either. I spent more time hanging out with friends and going to parties than attending classes. It wasn't until my junior year that things started to shift. One night, a friend of mine who was a computer science major asked me if I'd be interested in a side project. He had been developing an app for a while and wanted some business advice on how to bring it to market. At first, I was skeptical. I didn't know anything about tech, and I didn't think it would be possible to turn a small project into something bigger. But my friend convinced me, and I decided to take the plunge. We spent the next few months working on the app together. My role was to help with market research, pricing models, and creating a plan for how we would launch it. We finally launched the app, and while we didn't hit it big immediately, we gained a small but loyal following. The app wasn't perfect, but people loved it. Slowly, we started to generate some revenue. It was enough to keep us going, but not enough to quit our day jobs. After college, I landed a job at a small marketing agency. I wasn't thrilled about it, but it was a solid job, and it helped pay the bills. For a while, I kept working at the agency during the day, and then working on the app with my friend at night. Fast forward to a couple of years later, and I was faced with a tough decision. My side project had grown enough that it was taking up most of my time, and I was struggling to balance both. My job at the agency wasn't fulfilling anymore. I wasn't learning much, and I felt like I was wasting my potential. I had started to wonder if it was time to take the leap into entrepreneurship full-time. But the risks were daunting. I had a steady paycheck, health benefits, and the security that came with it. The app was still small, and we had a long way to go before it could sustain me financially. My parents, of course, didn't understand. They thought I was crazy. Why would you leave a stable job for something that might fail, they asked. But I couldn't ignore the feeling in my gut that I had to give it a shot. Eventually, I made the decision. I quit my job and went all in on the app. The first few months were terrifying. There were days when I didn't know how I was going to pay the bills. We had to make tough decisions about marketing, development, and scaling the app. There were times when I doubted myself and wondered if I had made a huge mistake. But the key to success, I realized, wasn't about avoiding failure. It was about pushing through it and learning from it. As the months went on, things started to click. The app began to grow, and we started to get traction. We improved the user experience, added new features, and created a better marketing strategy. Slowly, we began to see consistent growth. We secured a small round of funding from an angel investor, which gave us the breathing room we needed to hire more people and expand our operations. By the time we hit our third year, our app was making enough money to pay all of our salaries and keep the business running. But we weren't satisfied. We wanted more. We reinvested every dollar we made back into the business, constantly improving the product and finding new ways to reach customers. We hired more developers, marketers, and customer support staff. The growth was slow but steady. Then, something unexpected happened. A larger company in the same industry reached out to us with an acquisition offer. At first, we thought it was a joke. But after several rounds of negotiations, we realized they were serious. It was tempting. The money they were offering would set me and my team up for life. But we decided to pass. The thought of selling out and giving up on what we had built didn't sit well with me. I wanted to keep growing the company, keep improving the product, and see where we could take it. That decision turned out to be one of the best I ever made. Over the next 2 years, we grew exponentially. We expanded internationally, and our user base skyrocketed. We went from a small startup in Nebraska to a company with hundreds of employees across multiple countries. The revenue we generated was enough to make us one of the fastest-growing tech companies in our industry. Eventually, we became profitable enough that I could pay myself a decent salary, but I didn't take much. Instead, I reinvested most of it back into the business. I wanted to build something that would last, something that would leave a legacy. I knew that my story wasn't just about personal success. It was about creating opportunities for others. It was about empowering people, offering them a chance to do meaningful work, and showing them that they didn't have to follow the traditional path to success. Looking back on it now, I can't believe how far we've come. The journey was anything but easy. There were moments when I felt like giving up, when I wasn't sure if it was all worth it. But the hard times taught me resilience, and the successes taught me humility. Entrepreneurship is a roller coaster, and it's not for the faint of heart. But if you're willing to take risks, to learn from your failures, and to keep pushing forward, it can be one of the most rewarding experiences of your life. The best part of all of this? I'm still here. We're still growing, and the adventure isn't over. I've learned that success isn't just about making money. It's about building something that lasts, that adds value, and that makes a difference in the world. And most importantly, it's about doing it on your own terms. I never thought I'd be where I am today. If you had told me 10 years ago that I'd be running a thriving online business, I would have laughed. Back then, I was a broke college student living in a cramped apartment, struggling to make ends meet. But now, my company is bringing in 7 figures a year. It hasn't been easy, but it's been one hell of a ride. I grew up in a small town where opportunities were limited. My parents were hard workers, but neither of them had a degree. They instilled in me the value of education and perseverance, but they never had the resources to teach me how to truly make it big. The idea of starting a business was foreign to me, and the thought of entrepreneurship seemed like something that was only for the wealthy or the well-connected. In college, I was studying business, hoping that somehow it would open doors for me. But truth be told, I wasn't the best student. I would show up to class, take notes, and do just enough to pass, but I had zero passion for the material. All I could think about was how I was going to pay off my student loans after graduation. My grades weren't stellar, but I had a hustle mentality. If I could just find the right opportunity, maybe, just maybe, I could turn my life around. One evening during my sophomore year, I stumbled across a YouTube video about dropshipping. At the time, I had no clue what dropshipping was, but the concept intrigued me. The idea of running an online store without holding any inventory seemed like a dream come true. I spent the next few weeks binge-watching videos, reading blogs, and learning everything I could. I had no money to invest, but I was determined to find a way in. I scraped together around $200 from my part-time job and some savings, and I launched my first store. I chose a niche I thought had potential: custom phone cases. It was a saturated market, but I figured I could stand out by offering quirky designs. The process of setting up my store was a nightmare. The website looked amateurish, and I didn't know anything about marketing or SEO, but I was too stubborn to give up. I spent hours each day tweaking the site, writing product descriptions, and trying to get traffic. My first sale came a month later, and it wasn't even from someone I knew. That was a game changer. I realized that I could actually make money online. But after that sale, there was nothing. No more orders. I was discouraged but not defeated. I started learning about Facebook ads and influencer marketing. Slowly, things started to improve. For the next 6 months, I reinvested every penny I made back into the business. I started running Facebook ads, working with small influencers on Instagram, and optimizing my website. My sales slowly crept up, and I was on track to make a few $1,000s a month. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more than I had ever made at a part-time job. But there was a problem. I was spending a ton of time on my business, and I still wasn't profitable enough to quit my day job. I had to make a decision. I knew that if I wanted to take this seriously, I needed to go all in. So, I quit my job. This was one of the scariest decisions of my life. I had no backup plan. I wasn't making enough from my dropshipping business to comfortably live off of, but I felt like I had no choice. I was tired of working for someone else, tired of being stuck in a job I didn't care about. It was time to take the leap. I immediately dove into learning everything I could about e-commerce. I spent countless hours reading, experimenting with new marketing strategies, and fine-tuning my product selection. I realized that dropshipping wasn't a get-rich-quick scheme. It took time, patience, and an immense amount of effort. During this period, I went through some serious highs and lows. There were days when I made hundreds of dollars in a single sale, and then there were weeks when I barely made anything. I felt like I was constantly on the edge of burnout, but I kept pushing through. Then came the turning point. I was working late one night, testing new ad creatives for my store when I got a notification that one of my ads was performing exceptionally well. It was a breakthrough. I doubled down on the winning ad, scaling it up with more budget. The results were staggering. My sales skyrocketed overnight. Within a few months, I hit my first $10K month. I was ecstatic, but I knew I couldn't stop there. I scaled my business further by hiring virtual assistants to handle customer service, product research, and order fulfillment. I focused more on growing the brand and less on the day-to-day operations. Fast forward 2 years, and my business had gone from a small, struggling dropshipping store to a full-fledged e-commerce brand. I launched my own line of custom-designed products, something I had dreamed about from the beginning. I started focusing on building a community around my brand, engaging with my customers on social media, and creating content that resonated with them. Sales exploded as a result, and my brand gained traction. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. I remember those early days, sitting at my desk with nothing but a laptop and a dream, wondering if this whole thing was ever going to work out. I didn't have a mentor, a roadmap, or any real business experience. I just had a burning desire to make it work. The road wasn't easy. There were times when I doubted myself, times when I thought about giving up. But each challenge taught me something new. I learned how to market, how to manage people, how to handle stress, and how to persevere in the face of failure. Now, I'm not just an entrepreneur, I'm a mentor. I've started offering coaching to other aspiring business owners, sharing the lessons I've learned along the way. It feels amazing to help others achieve their dreams and to see them succeed in the way I have. There's nothing quite like the feeling of knowing you're making a real difference in someone's life. So, to anyone out there struggling with their business or wondering if they should quit, don't. Keep pushing, keep learning, and keep adapting. It won't be easy, but the rewards are more than worth it. Your success is out there. You just have to go after it. I didn't think I'd be here, but here I am, living proof that with enough hustle, determination, and a willingness to fail, anything is possible. Don't ever forget that. I was always the kind of person who couldn't sit still. Whether it was as a child trying to invent new games, or as a teenager looking for ways to hustle and make a few bucks, I was always searching for that next big thing. The problem, of course, was that I didn't really know what that thing was. Growing up in a small town, I had no mentors, no connections, and no real direction. But I had something that a lot of people in my position didn't, an unshakable belief that I could make something of myself. After high school, I found myself working dead-end jobs. I worked as a barista at a local coffee shop, then I was a cashier at a retail store. Nothing felt right. I always knew I was capable of more. But every time I thought about trying to start a business, I found myself overwhelmed with doubt. I didn't have much money, no experience, and no clue about what industry I should get into. But as they say, when you've got nothing to lose. And that's when it hit me. One evening after work, I was scrolling through Instagram, and I saw an ad for a dropshipping course. At first, I rolled my eyes. Dropshipping felt like one of those internet fads that everyone was hyped about for a minute, then forgot about when the next get-rich-quick scheme came around. But something about it clicked. I spent the next few weeks diving into everything I could find about it, watching YouTube tutorials, reading blogs, and joining Facebook groups. I didn't know it at the time, but this was the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey. I had about $500 saved up from working those dead-end jobs, and that's what I used to get started. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I spent the money on a domain name, a Shopify subscription, and some Facebook ads to drive traffic to my online store. I remember feeling nervous when I hit the launch button. What if nobody bought anything? What if I failed? But I pushed those thoughts aside and told myself that failure wasn't an option. I spent the next few weeks tweaking my website, finding suppliers, and adjusting my marketing strategies. And then, one day, it happened. I got my first sale. It wasn't much, just a $25 order, but I was ecstatic. It felt like I had just won the lottery. I remember telling my mom about it, and her eyes lighting up with pride. But then the next day, there was nothing. No more sales. I thought, maybe it was just a fluke. But that one sale gave me enough motivation to keep going. I realized I needed to find a niche, something that people would care about and be willing to buy. I spent days researching trends, browsing social media, and looking for products that were gaining traction. That's when I stumbled upon a popular fitness product. It was a simple resistance band, but people were going crazy for it. I figured I could sell it and try to get in on the trend. I created an ad targeting fitness enthusiasts, and within a few hours, I had more orders than I could keep up with. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was onto something big. The adrenaline rush of seeing orders come in constantly was like nothing I had ever experienced. But, of course, that didn't mean everything was easy. I had to deal with customer complaints, shipping delays, and suppliers who were constantly out of stock. I spent hours on customer support and learned more about marketing and sales than I had ever imagined. It felt like a grind, but it was a grind I was willing to endure. Then came the first big setback. One of my suppliers suddenly went out of business, and I had no backup plan. I had dozens of customers waiting for their orders, and I couldn't deliver. Panic set in. I was terrified that I was going to lose everything. But instead of folding, I decided to take action. I contacted every supplier I could find, looking for a replacement. I even started ordering products myself and shipping them directly to customers to fulfill the orders. It wasn't ideal, but it worked. I learned that being resourceful was just as important as being smart in business. After that, things started to click. I was making a profit, and for the first time, I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. I reinvested the money I made into ads and expanding my product line. As I scaled, I brought on a couple of freelancers to help with customer service and social media marketing. My revenue grew, and I was able to quit my part-time job. But just as I thought everything was going smoothly, I hit another roadblock. Facebook banned my ads. Without warning, my entire marketing strategy was wiped out overnight. I spent hours in online forums, trying to figure out what had gone wrong, but I couldn't find a solution. I had to adapt quickly. I started experimenting with Google Ads, Instagram influencers, and email marketing. Slowly, my sales started to come back, but it was a constant game of trial and error. I was learning more than I ever thought I would. Over time, my business grew into something I could never have imagined. I went from making a few $100s a month to well over six figures. I was able to hire a small team, move into a better office, and even start giving back by helping other aspiring entrepreneurs. But I still remembered those early days, those times when I felt like everything was going to fall apart. I kept pushing because I knew the only way forward was through. Looking back, I realize how much I've learned and how much I've grown. Entrepreneurship isn't about having a perfect plan or knowing everything from the start. It's about being willing to fail, adapt, and keep going when things get tough. There were days when I felt like giving up, but every time I did, something inside me told me that if I just kept going, I would make it. And I did. Now, I look at where I am today, and it's hard to believe it all started with just a $500 investment and a whole lot of hustle. But what's even harder to believe is that I'm just getting started. The journey continues, and every setback, every failure, and every victory has been worth it. Because in the end, it's not just about the money. It's about the person you become along the way. I was 22 years old when I first decided to start my own business. I had just graduated college with a degree in business administration, and like many others, I was eager to jump into the real world and prove that I had what it took to succeed. I spent the last few years reading all the popular success books, attending networking events, and consuming as much advice as I could. In my mind, I was ready. I had the knowledge and the drive, and I thought that was enough. But I didn't have a clear plan, and I definitely didn't have a safety net. My parents always told me to follow my dreams, but they didn't have much money, and they weren't in a position to support me financially. So when it came time to make my first move, I was on my own. I had always been passionate about technology, and after some reflection, I decided to launch a software development company. The idea seemed simple enough. I would create software tools for small businesses that were struggling to keep up with technology. These were businesses that couldn't afford expensive IT departments but still needed reliable and efficient systems to run their operations. My vision was to bridge that gap by providing affordable, customizable solutions. I spent weeks building a prototype for a project management app. It wasn't the most sophisticated tool, but it was clean, functional, and easy to use. I thought that if I could just get a few clients, I'd be set. I could expand my offerings, hire employees, and eventually grow into a major player in the industry. But here's where things took a turn. I had no idea how to market my product. I had spent all my time building the software, and while I knew it was good, I didn't know how to get anyone to notice it. I tried advertising on social media, posting in forums, and sending out cold emails. I even created a website and blogged about how small businesses could improve their workflow with my software. But no one was biting. I was getting frustrated. My savings were running out, and I couldn't afford to hire anyone for marketing. I felt like I was sinking into a hole that I couldn't escape from. One day, I received an email from a local business owner named Sarah. She had seen one of my blog posts and was interested in trying out my app. She ran a small coffee shop, and while the business was doing well, she was having a hard time keeping track of inventory, orders, and employees. Her request was simple. Could my app help her with that? I was thrilled. Finally, someone had taken interest in what I was doing. I set up a meeting with Sarah, and we discussed her business needs in detail. She didn't want something too complicated, just an easy way to manage her day-to-day operations. We agreed on a custom solution that would allow her to manage inventory, track employee schedules, and keep tabs on customer orders. She was willing to pay a small monthly subscription for the service, and after a few weeks of tweaking the app, I delivered a product that she seemed happy with. Sarah became my first paying customer, and to my surprise, she loved the app. In fact, she told all of her friends in the small business community about it. Word of mouth is a powerful thing, and soon enough, I had a few more customers. They were all small businesses, like Sarah's, and they appreciated how affordable and simple the software was. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me going. I reinvested the money into improving the app and added a few more features that I thought could attract bigger clients. The more customers I gained, the more I realized that I had tapped into something important. Small businesses didn't need complex, overpriced software. They needed something straightforward and affordable. As I built relationships with my clients, I learned that customer service was just as important as the product itself. I started offering more personalized support, even going so far as to set up one-on-one training sessions for some of my clients. It paid off. People appreciated the care I took with their businesses, and many of them became long-term clients. Over the next few years, my company slowly grew. I hired a small team of developers, and we worked on refining the product, adding new features, and improving user experience. I also hired a part-time marketing manager who helped us develop a more targeted online presence. Slowly but surely, the customer base started to expand, and I was able to start paying myself a salary. But the real breakthrough came when I made a bold decision. I was tired of trying to compete with larger software companies that had huge marketing budgets. Instead of trying to be everything to everyone, I decided to focus on one niche: small business owners who operated brick-and-mortar stores. It was a gamble. I invested heavily in targeted ads, partnerships with small business organizations, and influencer marketing within the niche. I also began offering free trials to attract more customers and get them hooked on the product. It took a few months, but eventually the marketing efforts started to pay off. Our user base grew rapidly, and we started getting inquiries from larger businesses that were impressed with the simplicity and affordability of the software. We raised our prices slightly, added more premium features, and hired a sales team to manage these larger clients. By the time I turned 30, my company was generating 7 figures in revenue, and we had established ourselves as a trusted name in the industry. Looking back, I couldn't believe how far we'd come. What I learned from that experience is that entrepreneurship is never as straightforward as it seems. It requires a lot of hard work, persistence, and the ability to pivot when things aren't working. I had no idea that small business owners would be the key to my success, but by focusing on their needs and offering something of real value, I was able to grow a business that has now helped thousands of companies streamline their operations. Today, I'm still running the same business, but we've expanded our offerings and have a larger team. We've raised additional capital, and we're planning to scale internationally. It's been a long journey, but one thing I know for sure is that there's no magic formula for success. It's about perseverance, adaptability, and knowing when to take risks. If there's one piece of advice I could give to anyone starting out, it's this: don't be afraid to fail. Fail fast, learn from it, and keep moving forward. The journey is never easy, but if you're willing to put in the effort, you might just surprise yourself at what you can accomplish. I was 25 when I had my first taste of true entrepreneurship. At that point, I had a degree in finance, a pile of student loans, and absolutely no clue about what I really wanted to do. I'd bounced from one dead-end job to another for a couple of years, each one a little worse than the last. The only thing that kept me going was this vague sense of ambition I had, that someday, somehow, I would build something for myself. I didn't have the luxury of a rich family to back me up, no connections, and honestly, I didn't even have a clear idea of what building something meant. I just knew I had to get out of the grind. It started with an idea that seemed small at the time, but would end up changing everything for me. I was living in a small apartment in a city that felt too big and too small at the same time. The rent was cheap, but the work was draining. I spent evenings scrolling through Reddit, reading success stories, and seeing people make six figures with side hustles and startups. I remember thinking, if they can do it, why can't I? And that's when I thought about something simple: t-shirts. I had always loved graphic design. Back in college, I would make small designs for friends and family, usually for fun, but I never thought I could make any money doing it. Then, out of nowhere, I realized that people were paying big bucks for custom-made t-shirts. I looked into the market and discovered that there was a growing demand for unique, quirky shirts that expressed personality, especially through social media. I figured, why not? Maybe I can make something of this. The first step was gathering information. I scoured YouTube for tutorials on how to start a print-on-demand business, read endless blog posts about marketing, and dug deep into the weeds of designing for products. I didn't have much money to invest, so I went with a print-on-demand service that would allow me to create designs without upfront costs. I spent nights designing quirky, edgy shirts that I thought would resonate with young people, a crowd I knew well. I launched the store online with no marketing budget. I posted the designs on Instagram, Facebook, and Reddit, hoping for some traction. The first sale came about 2 weeks in. A random person from across the country bought one of my designs. I remember jumping out of my chair when I saw the notification. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was the validation I needed. Someone out there liked my design enough to spend money on it. That was the spark. For the next few months, I worked nonstop. I designed new shirts every week, optimized my website, and learned how to use Google Ads and Facebook ads. I had no real strategy at first. I was just experimenting with different things. Slowly, the orders started to trickle in. Some months, I barely broke even. Other months, I made a few $100s. But that was all I needed to keep going. I didn't care about the money at first. It was about proving to myself that I could do it. But then, something changed. My Instagram page started gaining followers. I'm not sure how, but it did. Maybe it was because of the memes I started posting alongside my designs. Maybe people liked the humor. Either way, the traffic to my website increased, and sales began to pick up. I still remember the first big day. I made over $1,000 in one day. That was a game changer. I realized that this could actually work. Of course, with success came challenges. The first challenge was managing the orders. As the business grew, I struggled to keep up with fulfilling orders on time. I remember spending entire weekends packing shirts and running to the post office. It was exhausting, but I couldn't afford to hire help yet. Eventually, I hired my first employee, a friend of mine who was looking for extra cash. She helped me with packing orders, and that made a huge difference. I also had to improve my designs. I was learning fast that simply making cool designs wasn't enough. I had to make designs that connected with people on a deeper level. I spent hours researching trends, talking to my customers, and tweaking my designs to make them more appealing. I also started collaborating with influencers to promote the shirts, and that helped boost sales significantly. The next major breakthrough came when I decided to create limited edition collections. Instead of just creating random designs, I started making shirts tied to specific themes or events. I did a limited edition collection for a popular TV show and sold out in just a few days. That kind of success fueled me to keep pushing. I started expanding into other products like hoodies, mugs, and tote bags. Each new product line was a risk, but it paid off. Sales were growing exponentially, and so was my confidence. But like every entrepreneur's journey, there were setbacks. Around the time I launched my first full product line, my website crashed due to a surge in traffic. I had no idea how to fix it, and I lost several days of sales because of it. There were also plenty of moments where I thought about giving up. I'd gotten some negative feedback on my designs, and there were days where it felt like I wasn't getting anywhere. But I pushed through, and slowly but surely, the business became more sustainable. One of the most important decisions I made was to reinvest all the profits back into the business in the early days. I didn't take a paycheck for the first year. Instead, I used the money to upgrade the website, hire more employees, and run ads. I wanted to build something lasting, not just make a quick buck. Looking back, it feels like a blur. I went from being a broke, uncertain 25-year-old with no clear direction to running a full-fledged business by the age of 28. I'd turned my little side hustle into something that was making 6 figures a year, and I had built a team of people who were just as passionate about the brand as I was. My workday was no longer about just paying bills. It was about leading a team, creating new ideas, and building something meaningful. Now, I look back at that moment when I made my first sale, and I realize how far I've come. I still face challenges. The market is always changing, and running a business is never easy. But I've learned one crucial lesson. Persistence pays off. Starting a business isn't a quick path to success. It's about learning from your mistakes, adapting, and pushing forward even when things seem impossible. Today, my company has expanded beyond just t-shirts. We've launched multiple product lines, and we've even opened up a physical store. What started as a tiny online shop has grown into a recognizable brand. And it all started with a simple idea, a little ambition, and a whole lot of hard work. So, if you're reading this and wondering if you should take the leap, do it. I didn't know what I was doing when I started, but the journey has been worth every sleepless night and every failure. Trust me, the grind will pay off. Keep going. It's the only way to get where you want to be. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.